They bring home the Canadian promise for their workers who get a great paycheck selling wonderful products. But unfortunately, after the lost Liberal decade, that promise is broken. Workers work longer and harder for less. Housing costs have doubled, so our youth can no longer afford a place to live. Liberal taxes punish work, and Liberal inflation has driven 2 million people every month to food banks. This was all before President Trump first threatened his tariffs against Canada. I was glad to learn that the President and Prime Minister spoke today, and like all Canadians, I hope they had a successful talk, and I look forward to hearing about the results that they achieved in that conversation for Canadians. But regardless of what was said, what is now clear is that it was a mistake over the lost Liberal decade to weaken our economy and become more dependent on the Americans. Liberals blocked pipelines, LNG plants, port expansions, and other major projects because of a radical net zero ideology that has now made us more reliant on the Americans than ever before. We need to break that reliance. We need to put Canada first for a change by axing taxes on our industries to bring home more production, by lowering taxes on workers so they can spend at local small businesses, creating made-in-Canada jobs, by removing Liberal laws, C-69, the No New Pipelines law, by getting rid of the energy cap and the industrial carbon tax to bring production back to this country so that we can stand on our own 2 feet and stand up to the Americans with economic sovereignty.
You son of a bitch.
In other words, let's put Canada first. But one of the ways we can do that is also by making our communities safe again. Here in British Columbia, people are more afraid than ever before of crime. As our candidate, Tamara Cronus, will tell you, when she goes door knocking, she meets people who are struggling with fear, who are worried their cars will be stolen, that people addicted to drugs might rob them in order to pay for the addiction. We see addicts on street corners hunched over. We see tent cities that are routinely taken down and then pop up soon afterwards. This is the lost Liberal decade, that even in the most beautiful places in the world, like Nanaimo, we have seen this promise broken. Violent crime is up 50%. Human trafficking up 84%. Calls to the National Human Trafficking Hotline up 238% in the last 6 years. The vast majority of victims of human trafficking are women and girls. And even if they escape and bravely report their ordeal, when their perpetrators are arrested, they are promptly released on bail or later on parole. And then they reoffend and do it all over again. Then there's the guns. 85% of guns used in crime come in through our borders mostly from the United States. Only 1% of our shipping containers are inspected. And the Liberals passed C-5, getting rid of mandatory jail time for gun criminals. So the offenders who bring in these arms illegally get to serve their sentence in the comfort of their living room. They passed C-75, which allows repeat rampant offenders to be released within hours of their latest arrest, meaning that in Vancouver, the same 40 offenders had to be arrested 6,000 times in a single year. Worst of all is the fentanyl. Opioids have killed 50,000 people during the lost Liberal decade of decriminalization and tax-funded supply. Just to put it in perspective, fentanyl is 100 times more powerful than heroin. 40 milligrams of fentanyl can kill 20 people. A mass trafficker of these drugs is a mass murderer. He's like firing a gun into a crowded room. He doesn't know maybe who he's going to hit, but he's definitely killing somebody. 2 criminals were recently caught here in this area, Nanaimo, at a, quote, safe injection site sanctioned by the federal government under the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act and often funded with your tax dollars. There, these offenders were caught at the site by officers. They were caught with 245 grams of suspected methamphetamines, 230 grams of suspected cocaine, 45 grams of fentanyl. Another investigation led officers to find 640 grams of meth, 280 grams of cocaine, and 190 of fentanyl. They also seized 3 illegal firearms. Sadly, these stories are now all too common after the Liberals weakened our laws and allowed drugs in our streets. And because Liberals have stacked these laws one on top of the other, the problem compounds. Electing the Carney Liberals will mean 4 more years of the same failed Liberal catch and release, soft on crime, hug-a-thug policies that got us into this mess. 4 more years of the Liberals after the lost decade will mean more crime, more chaos, more death, more destruction. It's no secret that the Liberal drug policy has been a disaster, but they're doubling down. They have the same Liberal ministers, the same Liberal MPs, the same Liberal strategists, and the same Liberal policies of the last decade. In fact, they've gotten even more extreme. Now, the Liberals have brought on Gregor Robertson, the radical former mayor of Vancouver, who's known for running dangerous experiments like drug liberalization and so-called safe supply that flooded the streets. A recent study showed that these policies increased opioid hospitalizations by 58%. And the Vancouver police say that 50% of all the hydromorphone they recover is actually tax-funded drugs distributed by our very own government. It's nice to see the experts, so-called experts, finally acknowledging that they were wrong all along. But that does not mean the Liberals understand that. Gregor Robertson was one of the most radical zealots promoting free drugs in our communities, safe injection sites on every street corner, without consultation and regardless of whether people opposed. The courageous Chinese community in Richmond was forced again and again to stand up against these policies, and now everybody is speaking up. But Mark Carney won't solve the problem that his party caused. He said that fentanyl is not even a crisis in Canada. I don't know what world he lives on. How out of touch do you have to be to dismiss the idea of a fentanyl crisis?